I'd say about 90% of all of the people who phone my office are strangers to me, people I've never heard of before. And of the 90% of people that I don't know, I would say that 90% of those 90% are looking for one of two things: either to get married or to bury someone. I mean, the people bury someone who's died. Most people, who call don't go to church, because most people these days don't go to church. But when it comes to these pivotal events in their lives, births and marriages and deaths, they do turn to the church. And that's especially true when someone dies, because when someone dies, people generally just don't know what to do. They do not know what to do, but they know that if anyone knows what to do when someone dies, it's the church. In that sense, death really is like taxes. No one can figure it out. And so, because people can't figure death out, they come to us. So people really don't know anything about putting a funeral together, by and large. But there is one thing I find when people come to talk about funerals. There is one thing they do know. They almost always come in knowing exactly who should give the eulogy. And generally, they want a number of eulogies, and they come oftentimes with a list of all of the people who are going to give eulogies at the funeral. And so I always know that their faces are going to just fall, because it's the one thing they think they understand about funerals is the eulogies. And I know their faces are going to fall when I tell them that I don't think eulogies are a very good idea at all, and that the Book of Common Prayer never mentions eulogies, and that the Episcopal Church doesn't imagine there would be eulogies at funerals. And that's counterintuitive. I know that's counterintuitive because when someone dies, we instinctively want to paint them in the best possible light. They say you should never speak ill of the dead, and so a corollary of that might be that you should always speak exceptionally well of the dead. And so a eulogy, which literally means a good word, a eulogy, well, it's almost what you would expect to do, right? It's sort of an attempt to do for Uncle Bob's character what the undertaker did for his body, to make him look even better than he did when he was alive, right? So eulogies are a way to make the dearly departed look good. But when you bring eulogies into church, I think that eulogies really do more than just make the dead person, look good. I think when you bring eulogies into church, subtly they suggest that the loved one deserves a good eternity because they lived a good life. And so we try to tell about their good life in a subtle way to suggest that they deserve a good eternal salvation. In that sense, again, I think death for most people really is like taxes. You tally everything up, and you hope that the bottom line is good news rather than bad news. You hope that your loved one has earned a payoff, and you try to make it all add up by all sorts of subtle devices. You try to make it all add up so they do earn a good payoff. And so in that way, I think a eulogist in a church funeral, a eulogist at a church funeral is really like a good accountant. They both arrange the data to make sure that at the bottom you get a payoff and not a bill. And if that's true, then I guess the Bible sort of is like a religious tax code. It's this big, thick, complex, and seemingly inconsistent document. And so we have professionals who deal with it for us. So as April 15th draws near, brace yourselves, as April 15th draws near, or the funeral director comes to take the body away, we let the professionals, the accountants or the priests, take over for us. Because it's all so confusing. But we all basically, you know how taxes work. Maybe not the details, but you know basically how taxes work. Everyone does. And basically, we all know how the Christian tradition works when it comes to death. We know the basics, right? We know that good people earn from God a good eternity. That's what we think. Most people understand that it works that way. Most people understand that God, like any fair employer, pays people according to how hard they've worked and how productive they've been. And we all know that God helps those who help themselves. That may be the most well-known of all the verses in the Bible. God helps those who help themselves. Everyone knows that wonderful biblical verse. But of course, that's not in the Bible. This thing that God helps those who help themselves. Here's what's in the Bible. God helps those who cannot help themselves. God helps those who, for reasons beyond our imagining and sometimes for reasons that try our patience, God helps those who just don't help themselves. Blessed are the poor and the hungry and the miserably unhappy and the outcasts and the people love to hate. They're the ones who win in God's world. Well, but rich people, successful people, well-fed people, people with that perpetual smile on their faces that we all just detest, but people we really want to be. Woe to them. Woe to the successful. God is not impressed by our eulogies. The God revealed in Jesus, oddly enough, helps those who cannot help themselves, or for some inconceivable reason just don't help themselves. And it seems contrary to what American capitalism might suggest, God is really not much impressed by those who help themselves. God helps the helpless. God helps those who just cannot make it on their own. So, if you didn't notice, the cathedral right now is sort of helpless central, sort of loser central. It's full of photographs of broken people and artifacts of broken lives, and even artifacts like the benches in St. Columba of people who choose for the sake of something I don't necessarily grasp to make themselves, to willingly make themselves poor. If you were to take the exhibit that's in the cathedral right now and you were to drop it into the Met, or you were to drop it into MoMA or the Whitney or wherever you want to put it, if you took this whole exhibit and you dropped it into any of those places, it would tell probably an impactful story. Some impactful story. But when you put this exhibit here, it tells this story. These broken people, these broken lives, these self-offerings are sheltered beneath God's love, which is beyond anything we can imagine, and certainly beyond anything we can earn or deserve. This exhibit in this place, These are God's beloved, the poor and the hungry and the miserably unhappy and the outcasts and the people love to hate. These are the beloved of God. God helps those who cannot help themselves. God loves those who cannot help themselves. And really, isn't that all of us sometimes? People who just cannot help themselves, try though we might. Or maybe sometimes we just give up trying because trying has just worn us down. And what can we do then but turn to the God who helps those who cannot help themselves? I don't want to romanticize poverty or hunger or sadness or oppression or exclusion. There's nothing romantic about it. It's not good. None of it is good. But I have noticed this. When people find themselves in those places, when people find themselves helpless, then they let the people who love them love them. And for people of faith like us, I have found when we find ourselves helpless, when we find ourselves incapable of helping ourselves, so often that is finally when we let the God who loves us love us. And when we finally turn to God because we cannot help ourselves, God is always there, ready to help us who cannot help ourselves. Blessed are the poor and the hungry and the mournful and the oppressed and the excluded, even if that's us. When we stand before the mystery of death, steeped as we are in American capitalism, it's really no wonder that we want someone to give a eulogy that will explain why this person who has died has earned a good reward. No wonder we want to hear, American capitalists that we are, no matter, we want to hear that the bottom line has come up black and that there's a payoff waiting rather than a bill. But instead of that, the church gives us unimaginable good news. That we do not have to earn God's love. Because God wants only to pull us closer and closer into the divine heart, into God's heart, closer and closer for all eternity. We do not have to be good enough. We just have to be willing to be loved. We just have to admit to ourselves how poor and hungry and mournful and oppressed and excluded and needing love we are. We just have to admit that to ourselves and to fall into the arms of the God who is always waiting to catch us. This exhibit that's in the cathedral right now, it's called Sanctuary. Week after week, we come to this place where God gives us sanctuary. All we have to do is show up. That's it. Week after week, God bids us to draw near to this table. And at this table, to receive a gift beyond all imagining. Into our helpless and sinful hands, God gives the very life of God's Son. At this table, God pours into us, thirsty and hungry as we are, the very life of God's Son. Write a eulogy for yourself if you want. Do your best to make it all tally up right, make it all come out black at the bottom. But no matter what story you tell about yourself, it will never make you worthy of the gift that God offers you at this altar. And yet here it is for you, this gift. Here it is for all of us. And all we have to do is show up and let it be. All we have to do to receive a gift we could never earn is to stretch out our hands and receive it. God helps those who cannot help themselves. We won't have to go very far from this sanctuary, this place of safety, after the deacon dismisses us today, to find people who are poor and hungry and mournful and oppressed and excluded. We find ourselves surrounded in this remarkable city, surrounded in this great city by people who cannot, or for some reason, just do not help themselves. So at this altar, God gives us the life of his Son with any cost to us at all. Except maybe this. Maybe there is this cost. That what we have received as a gift, we give as a gift. So that when we leave this sanctuary, the people we meet might come to know that their worth is not proved by the stories we may tell about them or they may tell about themselves now or at the hour of their death, but that their worth is determined by the love that God has for us all, and maybe especially the love God has for those who just cannot help themselves.